Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live, on air, or online at iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, nccradio.org, or download our own award-winning WHPC app to hear all of our programming. Herbally Yours consistently brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living, right here on WHPC since 1992. Today, we are so happy to bring on board as our guest, Andy Pace, and he'll be talking about human healthy homes and building a healthy home environment. Andy is a healthy home concierge with over 30 years of experience in the healthy home building materials industry. He is the founder of the Green Design Center and host of Non-Toxic Environments podcast. He's an expert at creating healthy homes that are non-toxic and free of off-gassing. He has a strong focus on mold prevention and remediation and works with contractors and home builders around the world to create healthy breathing within the home through proper systems, humidifiers, and other modes of healthy ventilation. And his projects and expertise have been featured many places besides Herbally Yours, including Men's Health, Architectural Digest, Wellness Mama, just to name a few. You can find out more about his work at thegreendesigncenter.com. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ellen. Boy, that introduction, I really don't need to say much after that, I don't think.
Well, it looks like you have certainly been extremely focused on helping people become more aware about as well as creating a healthy home environment. So let's go back in time to little boy Andy. And what made you walk the path to this being your area of expertise?
That's actually a wonderful question, specifically the way you phrased it, because, I mean, literally as a little boy, I grew up in a family business. My family has owned a commercial construction material supply company that dates back to 1938. And as a child, it's still in grade school and in high school, I was actually working in the family business of all things programming computers because, I had that knowledge and we needed to add that to the business. And so I started working on programming computers and I got interested in construction. I heard about architects and builders and all these grand projects. I think at the time my family's company was working on the Milwaukee Bucks arena, and we were providing materials for that. So I got really interested as a high school student, ended up going to college, coming out of college, and the first thing I wanted to do was join the family business. So I did, and it was my job to work with architects and engineers to specify the correct materials for certain situations and then supply those materials. And I would be on job sites all over the country, working with architectural firms, and we ran into a problem on a project in Milwaukee back in 1992 where one of the products that we supplied and recommended was being used on a below-grade parking structure for a large condominium complex. After the primer was applied to the concrete, we started getting phone calls from people living in the condos above. They would call the construction trailer complaining of the odors from the primer coat that was applied. Now, we were taking the precautions we thought we needed to take at the time. We thought, well, first of all, it's a water-based product, so it can't be dangerous. We put up the plastic to make sure that things didn't travel. Well, we then got a call from the United States Senator's office who lived in that condo. And, when Senator Herb Kohl's office calls, you get a little bit more concerned. And then I think the worst thing that could ever happen in a job was we actually had 3 of our workers rush to the hospital because of inhalation complications. They literally couldn't breathe in the space. And now we are in panic mode. It turns out that water-based does not mean safe. Water-based just meant that half of the liquid component of the product was water and the rest was all these nasty solvents. So it was at that moment between my customers and my own workers that I learned the hard lesson that building materials are dangerous. And we stopped the job. We found another product to finish the project with, a very small, little-known company out of California called American Formulated and Manufacturing, or AFM for short. They made paints and coatings and specialty sealers for people with chemical sensitivity and chemical allergies. And it just got me thinking, well, if this company exists, there must be other companies out there that do the same thing. And if there are people who are this seriously compromised by the building materials, what else is out there that we could help them with? And it literally started the paradigm shift for our company in working with nothing but healthier, less toxic building materials. And that was 30 years ago, and we still do the same thing to this day.
So that's exciting to me because I've been interested in natural healing since at least that long. Mm-hmm. So with this long history of these things being known, certainly it's not true that there's actually a consciousness about this in general in the construction industry.
No, I think in general, contractors and architects design and build buildings that are going to be long-lasting, that have an aesthetic value to them, that meet a price point. The idea of environmentally friendly has just kind of come about in the last 20 years. The idea of human friendly is just a very, very small segment of the industry, very, very tiny segment. Even though in the last 20 years of promoting eco-friendly materials, they have also been promoted as being somewhat human-friendly as well, just to kind of get that human aspect so that people are more interested. But quite honestly, the human-friendly building material industry is just in its infancy stages. And unfortunately, the industry is waking up kind of the hard way, the same way I did 30 years ago. The industry is kind of having that exact same experience now collectively because of things like mold problems and formaldehyde issues that are just rampant throughout the industry. We thought we learned our lesson with lead and asbestos years ago, but that's not the case. We're now learning because of all the chemical ingredients and now things like the plastics that are found, the forever chemicals that are coming out of building materials that are now becoming the hot topic. We're learning the hard way that the way we design and build buildings just isn't overall healthy for the occupants.
So that's really interesting because you made a great point talking about lead and asbestos. I know as someone who, let's say, rents apartments to others in buildings that I own, everything has to be signed off in terms of inspections for lead and asbestos. Truthfully, some of the places don't have to be because they were built in 1918. Right? So they're outside of the code. I don't know if they have asbestos because no one forced us. We just signed something saying who knows. So there's a lot of variations in the regulations, but that's a great one that you bring up because I'm sure many people have heard of that, where lead paint became known to be toxic. Children were eating it as it flaked off of walls. So there was actually legislation about that, and it did move it forward. So is it possible that some of these other things will actually have that path eventually?
I think it's possible. I think it's probable that they will actually, but it's going to take another 30 years, unfortunately. You have to remember the two things. There are, at this point, we have about 92,000 chemicals that are being used to create building materials and home goods. 92,000 chemicals that the EPA has essentially rubber stamped into being approved for use. Out of those 92,000 chemicals, about 3% have been actually tested for their toxicological effects on humans. So we have no idea what the other 97% do to humans. And out of those 92,000 chemicals, there's only been a handful of them, in the last 30 years, 40 years that have actually been deemed illegal and have been taken off the market. You have to rely on two things. Number one, class action lawsuits, enough class action lawsuits that manufacturers start to respond, that the government steps in. This is what happened with lead and asbestos. There hasn't been enough yet to step in with formaldehyde, although it's starting to happen. I think formaldehyde is the next one that will be deemed illegal at some point, although, that still might be another 15, 20 years down the road. But all these other chemicals that we have absolutely no idea what they do, we're not going to be at that point where lead and asbestos is for another 30 years. And so it's incumbent upon us to keep our own spaces clean. And I'm not saying that you have to become the expert, you have to become the scientist, the chemist, but we have to start incorporating more common sense into the dialogue. Common sense is no longer common anymore. We rely on so-called experts, we rely on influencers on Instagram to give us advice on how we're supposed to live in our homes. We need to rely on true experts. We need to rely on our own gut instincts. And I think sometimes our own gut instincts get overshadowed by what our head's telling us, which is, well, don't listen to your gut instinct, because once you open up that can of worms, who knows what we'll find out. So it's better off for us just to sort of forget about it, ignore it. But once we start to learn more, and I'm sure you did too, in the holistic healing realm, the more you learn, the more you get interested in digging in deeper. And it becomes a hobby, then a passion. And then that passion becomes, your way of life. And that kind of happened for me with healthy building materials. I'm not saying homeowners and renters need to get to this level, but at least start using your intuition and saying that maybe my environment isn't as healthy as it needs to be. And maybe by cleaning it up, also I'll find that my own personal health gets better because I'm eliminating all the toxins and pollutants that are causing my body's immune system to be so inflamed.
That's great advice. And I also know what you brought up earlier. Sometimes they're trying to balance, let's say, something that might be called eco-friendly. And so they'll have a building that's sealed really well, so it stays warm or cold. But what that does is it actually traps in more pollutants because there's no window that you can open. So this seems to be, a variation in goals, and it's very confusing.
It's the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing, honestly. It is, of course, it's the right thing for us as a society, a developed society, to do the best we can to preserve our outdoor environment, to conserve energy, to be a steward of the earth. That's no question. The problem is, in doing so, we are ignoring the human occupants, okay? And to your point, we're closing up our buildings, we're building our homes and our buildings so incredibly tight to reduce the amount of energy that it takes to heat or cool it. We're forgetting about the humans that have to live inside those buildings. Now, think of that story I said on the job site where people in an enclosed space were getting sick from the building material, from the coating. This is what's happening in our home, but sometimes at a very slow level. And we're sort of being lulled into this sense of security, thinking we're doing the eco-friendly thing, but we're not actually doing the human health-friendly thing. And so we have to look at that. I think the industry is waking up to this. I remember back in the mid-2000s when green building became the rage in the industry. This is probably the zenith of the green building industry, 2005 to 2010. And all commercial buildings, residential buildings, contractors were talking about energy efficiency and the use of compact fluorescent light bulbs and the use of better insulation and spray foam insulation and so forth. By about 2010, actually, when we had the huge housing market crash and all money went out of construction, people started learning during that time, like, well, if I'm doing something to save the environment and it's costing me X amount, what is it doing to help me and my family? And as money got put back into construction in 2013 and 14, the same dollars came back in saying, all right, I still want to be friendly to the environment, but it also has to be friendly to my kids. If I'm going to do insulation in this new home, it can't be a spray foam insulation that's going to off gas for 5 years. It's got to be something that's actually going to be healthier for my family as well. And so this is when we started basically smartening up a little bit, right, about how we build our homes. And so now it's only been about 8 years that we've been on this path of really truly healthier building. And it's just now starting to find its way into more mainstream publications. I'm doing interviews with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times writers on a more regular basis because there is an interest in healthier homes.
That's wonderful information. And I want to remind our listeners, you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, where you can listen live or online on any podcast venue. For more information on today's guest or topic, you can send an email to whpc@ncc.edu or contact yours truly, the Natural Nurse, at naturalnurse.com. And I also want to talk about our guest today, Andy Pace, who is a healthy home concierge for over 30 years. And the best place to look for him, I believe, is called thegreendesignCenter.com. Tell me, Andy, is that like the first stop for people looking, perhaps they're building a new home and they want to know some of this information?
It is. It's kind of our main site for not only some of the materials that we supply, but also our podcast, my consulting. I actually consult with clients all over the world who are either building a new home or are in the process of designing something, or maybe they just want to find a healthier apartment to live in. And they're looking for some tips on what to look for when they're shopping.
That's great information. And what about, you did bring up a little bit about the cost, because since this information is new and the materials that might replace the older, more toxic materials may have much more cost to them. That's been actually my experience when I look into it. So that leaves out a lot of people who really are limited in what they're going to spend.
Yes and no. I think you have to compare apples to apples. And so a number one question I get from a new client is how much more is it going to cost me to build a home that's healthy compared to a traditionally built home? And my answer always is, and it will continue to be, it depends on if you're comparing quality level to quality level. If you are building a home that all the components come from big box stores and you're getting deals off of Amazon and you're buying maybe some materials off of Craigslist, a healthy home probably will be more expensive. And the reason for that is most of the materials that we're going to recommend are not only healthy, but almost more importantly, are high quality, and they'll last longer. They'll look better. They're more durable, easier to work with. So if you now are building a custom home with middle to high end features in that home, and then you want to do that home in a healthy manner, it's not going to cost you $1 more. And so you really have to compare the materials and the systems that you're using. And once you do that, you'll find that building a healthy home typically doesn't cost more. Now, let's say, for instance, you do have that client, and I have several that are building the lowest price home they can afford because of where they're at, and so we can build that home healthier. We have to make choices. We have to decide what's going to be the best impact for the least cost, and so for that, I incorporate a way called healthy value engineering. We decide that if 90% of the toxicity issues inside of a new home will come from the things you see and touch on a daily basis. That's true of anybody's home. And from that, you deal with flooring, wall finishes, cabinetry, and then your own personal furnishings like furniture and window treatments and area rugs. Those are the 4 areas we concentrate our time with. And we maybe will spend a little more on those materials because those are the ones that'll affect you the most. And then allowing for the other areas of the home maybe to allow for lower priced items to get the job done, of course, in a quality manner. But we shift those dollars to where they make the biggest impact.
Right. And that's the best that you can do. And also, as these things become used more often, their cost is also going to come down because they'll be more widely available. But when you think about the cost in terms of human suffering and how much you spend on health, it's really a bargain to do it right in the first place. And all of, let's say, the center of concentration and thought should incorporate human health. And I think that's what in what you've been talking about all these years.
Ellen, I can't tell you how many clients I have on a daily basis, actually, probably average 3 or 4 clients a day that come to me and saying that they have a known health problem because of a mold exposure, because of a chemical exposure to pesticides, what have you, that they have been working with doctors and with functional practitioners for 10 years. And they've realized that it's their environment, their indoor environment, that's actually the genesis of their problem. And
well, wait a minute. Let's talk about mold, because that's an important issue. And that can sneak in all kinds of ways.
Without a doubt, it's not only the way the home is built, but it's also the way the home is maintained. And then once you're in that home and using it, for instance, one of the simplest things you can do in your home, whether it's a home that you own, a space that you rent, is to make sure you ventilate the bathroom, the shower area. Get rid of all that steam that's developed, because that steam, if it doesn't get out of that space, will linger and become a breeding ground for mold. And once you have that breeding ground for mold, those spores can travel anywhere in the house and find a very comfortable place to go. And then it starts to proliferate and create an actual mold problem somewhere. And so by getting rid of the moisture at the point that it's been created is a very simple way to eliminate a lot of mold problems that are found in most people's homes.
So make sure that the ventilation of that bathroom, I know we have one that actually goes like through the attic and outside from a fan that's in the bathroom, which, is a big process to suck that air out, even though there's a window in the bathroom. I'm wondering why that wouldn't even be enough.
Well, it used to be that having a window in a bathroom was code. And as long as you had a window in the bathroom, you didn't need to have a ventilation fan. Well, we realized that, number one, people don't normally open windows in the normal course of taking a shower. Okay. Number two, in most parts of the country where it's really hot or really cold, you're not going to open up your window. Number three, opening up a window is only going to be at about 40 inches off the floor, and it provides for air that blows into the bathroom, but heat and steam rise.
Right, that's true.
And it sits against the ceiling, and then again it's carrying with it not only the moisture, but also dead skin cells and soap scum, which is essentially food for the mold spores. So you're blowing in air from the outside that probably contains mold spores naturally from outdoors, and it combines with the steam and the food source to create a moldy environment. And so now it's building code in most parts of the country that for any bathroom that has a shower or a shower over a tub, you have to have a ventilation fan that vents to the outside.
Well, that's great information. Now, I know that people can find out more at thegreendesignCenter.com, and also we will have live links to that and also to your podcast, Non-Toxic Environments, for those people who want to follow up with you. And so you don't actually have to go somewhere to do the job. You can act as a consultant with whoever they are working with.
That's correct. Most of the work I do is I'm here in Wisconsin. Most of the work I do is states away. I do a lot of work in Texas, a lot of work in California. I do my fair share of work here in the Midwest, and then, of course, a lot of clients on the East Coast and the Southeast. Basically, the pockets of the country where there's a lot of construction, I'm doing a lot of work in. But I have clients in Australia, New Zealand, Spain, Germany, the UK, anywhere that somebody is trying to find a healthier space to live, or just needs even just 15 or 20 minutes to talk over some ideas with somebody who's got a lot of experience. I've worked with over 30,000 clients in my career who have all sorts of chemical sensitivities, allergies, Lyme disease, mast cell disorder, chronic inflammation, and they're dealing with environmental issues inside of their homes. And they just need somebody maybe just to talk to go over some ideas with. I can do appointments in 15-minute increments all the way up to working with a client for a year on a full project.
Now, I know that also on your website, people can find out about tests, like healthy home tests that you can that can help evaluate what issue they may be facing in their own home.
A lot of times what we talk about over the phone or on a Zoom call, we just can't get down to the crux of the problem. So I need some essentially virtual boots on the ground. So I actually send out these test kits that can be administered in a home. Takes about 20 minutes for the homeowner to do so. that will test for formaldehyde, VOCs, and mold, active mold inside of the home. And in about a week, I'll get a picture of exactly what's going on in that home. And now we can have a conversation about what's going on exactly, and then how do we mitigate those issues. So it really helps with having that test kit. And we're only talking about a few $100s to do this. It's not a very expensive process, but it is very, very detailed and very useful.
And then you could at least get a handle on some of the things that may or may not be a problem. I find that I'm personally much less reactive in an older house, actually. I live in one house that was built in 1895, and I have another one that was like 1918, and they seem to have a lot less of those chemical exudates than you. When I walk into a new construction, let's say my friend moves into a brand new, gorgeous condo, and especially in Florida, I'm just hit in the face by this like chemical soup. Yeah. I can't even stay in there.
That's a great word for it, chemical soup. Think about homes that are built 100 years ago, utilizing brick, and we used wood back then. We used a lot of stucco. We didn't use drywall. We didn't use plastic carpets, plastic insulation, plastic this and that. We used the materials that we had, and the homes had natural ventilation because we didn't care about energy efficiency at the time. It was all about having a space that was safe and kept us out of the rain. Homes built from about 1970 on started to incorporate the use of quickly manufactured, less expensive materials that was supposed to save us time in the construction process. It was supposed to be more innovative. The reason why this happened was essentially the oil embargo in the early 70s. It caused the industry to think about energy efficiency because it cost a lot of money to heat and cool buildings at the time.
Well, listen, I'm going to cut you off there only because we're coming to the end of our time. And I want to thank you so much for a fascinating topic and for being our guest today. And I would tell our listeners, for more information, go to thegreendesigncenter.com to either talk with Andy or get some information, read about how you can check up on your home, and find out if any of those illnesses people in your family are suffering may be, in fact, related to outgassing and other environmental factors linked to your home. And thank you, listeners, so much for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us again next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.